years, but of course. So it's just great to see everybody. I think Grand Junction is an amazing place to be doing this, and to talk about family and Thor, my dad, is probably the hardest job. Science was easy. You guys had the easy assignment. I had a very different, kind of experience. I came along 8 or 9 years after Karen and 13 years younger than Eric, so I was about 9 or 10 when all you guys went off to college. And so I was sort of an only child with older brothers and sisters, what I always said, which I think is ideal in many ways. Right? You get all the attention and all the food, and you get, I guess, getting doted on by Karen and Carl and Eric was great. I got dragged around to a lot of climbing trips and adventures that really were a special experience for me, and having that move to Flagstaff I'm always appreciative for, because that's what I knew. I knew Flagstaff. I barely remember, a vague memory of a little apartment with a big pool table in the Navy. I remember being under a big table, I think it was a pool table, but I was 3, and but it was really, so family. I grew up with a scientist, ultimate scientist father, and a natural scientist father, and a social scientist mother, and so I was right in the middle, knowing that how we are shaped and who we are really is very much family and society, and I'm a biologist now, and of course our genes and our heritage, and so family is an interesting concept for me to really think about in this context, and thinking about how Dad and his relationship to his family and his relationship to us is a very hard thing to gauge. So there's obvious things we know about our families, how they've shaped us. There's things we think we understand about how families have shaped us, and there's things that we don't have a clue about how our families have shaped us. And so Dad grew up in this very interesting environment, and a son of a preacher in Puget Sound, and clearly during that time just fierce loyalty and dedication to family was instilled in him. And I remember, we're talking with Kim, we had family reunions, and Ingrid, from my earliest memories back up in Seattle and then in Flagstaff, the 5 brothers, this was the family with 20 brothers, of course, right? Because there were 5 sons and all had 4 brothers, so I couldn't quite figure out why there were so many people in this family. There were 20 brothers, it turns out. And the camaraderie with all of the brothers, and with Leroy, his closest brother, was so profound that carried through all their adult lives. And there were really amazing reunions, including building rafts and going fishing in the Sound on the Kontiki, and hikes up to the top of the peaks in Flagstaff, and going to Keat Seal, and even a Hawaii trip, right? So that thread of family for Thor was huge in his upbringing and his adult life. And that really came down to his family as well. The 4 of us, and Mom, who I want to, wish she was here. She really wanted to come. This idea that the family really came first, with science in there too, was very clear. My memories are of someone who took me on all his field trips when I was a kid. We would go out. He loved to drive, and I think we drove to Grand Junction in that era all the time. We came here a lot. I remember learning to drive on that drive and going up and down the hills trying to keep my foot steady. That was an important thing for him. 2 hands on the wheel, that was important. And I remember a trip down in southern Arizona, actually near Wickenburg, where we were driving the government vehicle, just the 2 of us, way out. I don't know, we were probably a couple miles out. It seemed like we were way out in the desert, and the car hits a rock. The steering wheel spins about 100 miles an hour, and the linkage is dead, and we're stranded there out in the desert. And he's like, "See, I was holding my thumbs like this. If I'd had them in there, it would have been broken." And so I learned that lesson. I always drive like this now. And we walked. I don't know how long we walked. We walked and we walked and walked on a little dirt trail into a road, and finally we hitchhiked and actually got back. And they called the conductor, and the government got the vehicle, and we got home. But it was it was that kind of thing we did a lot. He took me out to Black Mesa, and I was always, I don't know how big I was, 6 or 8, and we would come across these big dry washes that were so exciting to Dad, because we'd jump over the edge and there'd be this tree buried, an old tree trunk buried there. He'd say, "Oh, we got to get a picture of that. Rolf, will you go over there for scale?" So I somehow scramble and fall down the dirt to get over there and take a picture. So it looked like a tree instead of a little twig and some sand, which it would have looked like otherwise, right? So he involved me in a big way in all these driving trips. And I know that, and certainly, that affected all of us in sort of our thinking about being scientists and about how we look at the world. I could not be a geologist because that slot had been taken a couple times over. So he encouraged me in biology, and we had some great talks about that over the last few years. And it's interesting to me, so science was so big in his life, for so much of his life, and then the last few years, it's particularly this last year in Grand Junction, in a very natural and wonderful way, it just sort of faded away slowly, and family came out to be this very sustaining and cherished thing for Dad. And Karen, of course, was a huge part of that. Thank you for all you've done in that. It was this last year, I think, was obviously a huge gift to all of us. It was a gift to Dad. It was a gift to me to get to know him again in this way. Some of you know I came out about a week and a half before he passed away. And crazy, I was going to come out because I thought he was dying, right? I thought he would be dead by the time I got here, and he rallied. And so he went back to the Commons, and I see some of the hospice people here who were so good to him. And I was not going to come because he had rallied. And then I thought to myself, that's idiotic. I mean, here's a chance to see my father again. So I got a ticket in the morning, I was here in the afternoon, and spent 2 really amazing days, and saw all the care that had been going into keeping him alive, and how much he was valuing it. And it was a real gift. I was reading him Scientific American, I love to hear science even at the end. And so I was talking about hydromethanes or something, hydrated methanes was an article, which are these collections of methane under the ocean that are maybe a big source of fuel and might affect the climate. So he was very interested in this article. And so I would read a paragraph, we'd stop and talking about it, he'd say, there's a lot of that in the permafrost as well. That's a real issue. There's probably as much if there's in the oceans. And I got to the next paragraph. And there's also a lot of hydromethanes in the permafrost. So, in his last weeks, he was predicting the next paragraph of Scientific American and loving the conversation. I mean, he really fed on that. It was just really fun to see, but it wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was the family, and it came back to family for him and for me. And so I'm not going to go much longer. I just think that gift and that kind of cycle of intense family time and a huge career that took something away from that perhaps, but then coming back to family is the most important thing, is a real lesson for us all, and I really value that I was part of that. So, thanks.